Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Morton Subotnick?
Yes, this is he.
Hello, Morton. This is Paul Holdengräber calling you from the Quarantine Tapes. I'm so very delighted that you could take time to speak to us today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Tell me, where do I find you? And if I may ask, what have you been up to in these now 6 months of quarantine?
Has it been that? I thought it was my whole life.
Doesn't it feel like that?
Yeah, no, we're up in Westchester near Peekskill on the Hudson.
And what have these 6 months been for you? What have you been doing, and maybe what haven't you been doing that you wish you could have done?
Well, I've been doing 85% of the time. I'm doing what I always do. I'm in my studio working. I have a lovely view of trees from here, and so that part has been pretty steady in terms of my work, but not being able to go anywhere is another situation. But I've been doing pretty much, I would say 75% of my time is doing exactly what I've been doing most of my life.
Sometime, Morton, in the 1950s, it dawned on you that you were living through what you call a pivotal turning point in the history of music. What was the nature, if one can say, of this epiphany? You compare that moment, actually, so interestingly, I found, to the beginning of what it might have been to be at the beginning, at the origin of the printing press.
Yes, that was the end of the 50s, and I realized that, at that point in time, we were already a little bit technically savvy. We had radios, of course, but most of the history of the human being has been, with music, has been listening directly to someone playing or playing it yourself. There was no other way to do it. That's for, I think as far as I can tell, maybe 45,000 years at least, because that's the first flute that we've got. That's a long time. And the same, of course, was true of the printing press, and I guess until writing to start with. But I guess they had tablets they could send around. But pretty much the printing press made reading what someone wrote available, worldwide, and it changed a lot. And it seemed to me that was going to happen. I didn't know exactly, how it was going to be. Probably with recordings, with vinyl records, but I really didn't know, what would happen with a computer and so forth. But that seemed to me sort of an equivalent that, suddenly people in the middle of, I don't know where, out in Borneo or wherever is remote, that they would be able to hear music. They'd be able to hear the Berlin Philharmonic. Only people who lived in Berlin could hear the Berlin Philharmonic. And even if you could afford, but it was cheap too.
You mean records were cheap?
Yeah, they were cheap. They were under $1, and that was $3 or $4 now, but still, the equivalent to $3 or $4. But they were cheap. They weren't very good. You could hear it.
No, when I read about you comparing it to the printing press, it brought back to mind reading these wonderful books about the origin of the printing press and also the oral tradition. You might be familiar with Walter Ong, who wrote so beautifully about the theme, and I'm wondering if you can bring us back to that moment a little bit later in your life. of Mills College in the 1960s, where you then worked on the development of the first analog synthesizer. You said you wanted to create, and I love this, an electronic music easel, an object similar to what they'd be using in 100 years.
Well, I thought the 100 years, because it took that long for the printing press to get, real books out, people. That was 100 years. But, I still feel that way. It's changed, it's evolved. But I pretty much, from that moment all the way to the present, but at that moment, it was very exciting to me because I realized that the music that, I was playing actually part-time with the San Francisco Symphony at the time, and also going on concert tours with a chamber music group, and played concertos and things like that with orchestras. But I realized that two things really. One was that not everybody. You really get music through. It speaks through the ear, and if you're a musician, it speaks in different ways through the body and so forth, body memory and all that. But most people hear music. I realized that this music that we're hearing, because of the oral tradition, and I say that because we did write music finally, but that didn't help anyone because they couldn't hear it. That's why I mentioned the ear. Right. Music really enters through the ear, so musicians can play it from written music, and that did something. But it wasn't the big turnover that the printing press did. And I realized that it was complicated. I'm pausing because it's a complicated notion. On the one hand, a person like myself who had started music early, maybe 6, 7 years old, and pretty much got addicted to it, and was playing music all my life for hours a day, and learning music and learning about music, and that was it. So by the time I was 17 or 18 and getting ready to enter the world, I was playing professionally when I was 15 or 16 years old. So that was, it was just part of me. But most people don't. The majority of people don't come near that kind of experience. So those people were, the majority of people were sort of stuck at 17 or 18. You can't decide, actually, I don't think, to suddenly be a concert pianist at 18 years old. You could decide to do it, but it's very remote possibility at that point.
It won't materialize simply because you've decided.
That's right. And, it's all this body energy that, memory that you develop over all those years. So, it occurred to me that the two things that occurred to me, it was similar to the printing press, that the people who were addicted to music in the traditional way, from playing an instrument, would probably continue that way. The technology was not going to change much. The good thing is that you were a good musician. The bad thing is that you can't take on new things. Like they can't take on the music, you can't easily take on new things at that point. But the majority of people would be getting it, maybe for the first time, they'd be getting interested in the music. And the dichotomy to me at that point, and the reason I actually gave up playing the clarinet, one of the reasons I gave up, I left the concert world and devoted myself to this other, is that they would be getting music through what we call popular music, because that's why it's popular, because people listen to it. It's not something that requires years and years of experience. It's relatively straightforward, and it's popular. And so they'd be coming to it from there. So we had the same kind of thing with the book when it came. A lot of people felt this was terrible because people weren't going to be reading the Bible not in Latin or in Hebrew or whatever language, whatever the book was supposed to be in, and that was going to do some bad things. And it did democratize it, but it certainly did. It's caused a lot of problems as well. Yes. It's a very difficult situation, and I felt that the beauty of what was going to happen with music was also problematic. That people were already illiterate musically, and this would make them literate only through the ear. So, I have a Schwinn bike, and one of the things I'm doing in this quarantine is I'm going 7 miles a day on my Schwinn bike, and I'm listening to and to a number of things. Right now, I'm probably for another 5, 6, 7 days, it'll be about 2 weeks, I'm listening to The Art of the Fugue as I go. And it's just, and I'm watching mountains and France going through it on my computer as I do this.
How glorious! How glorious!
Yeah, I know, and you know, I was thinking about that this morning. When you get to a double fugue, it makes my heart race. It's just my head opens up. And then I was thinking back, you know, from those early days, it's very unlikely that a person who didn't grow up with as much literacy as I did would be able to hear that and know that that's happening. So it was a complicated thing. And so at that point, now back to the late 50s and the early 60s, and when I was working, and actually we started this in the 63 with Don Buchla. I wanted to create something that was not a musical instrument. I like to call it now a traditionally based musical instrument where you can play. The only thing you can do on it is play the music similarly to everything that's been done with it. If you have a black and white keyboard, it's basically a keyboard instrument, and you have to tune it. So whatever key you've got it tuned to, whatever tuning you've got it tuned to, is going to give you that kind of music. And you have to learn to play it. I mean, it's a crazy notion, but if you give someone a traditional instrument that connects to something, you still have to learn the thing to play it. So I wanted something. I called that making new old music.
Yeah.
And what I was looking for is somebody at that age level, 17, 18 years old or younger, that wanted to create something musically. You could do that in painting, but you can't easily do that in music. So that was the idea. I was going to have to place myself in order to make a new music. And perhaps in time, if you have the right equipment that would facilitate this to happen, there would be new music that didn't start at 5 years old, but started at 11 years old or 20 years old or 30 years old. But it would be creative, and it would have its own syntax, its own life. So that I tried to place myself. I knew I couldn't place myself as a person who didn't. So I thought of this is going to sound presumptuous, but I thought of myself not as a composer, really, but as even though I was writing music then for traditional instruments, but I thought of myself as a creative musician trying to make a new music. And I was thinking of Berlioz. I was thinking of these grand pieces that you could do, but I didn't know what that. I didn't want to sound like Berlioz. I wanted to grow and find some language, but I don't know why, but I never really paid much attention to his background. But I know that he got kicked out of the conservatory in France at one point, and my guess is that he wasn't quite fooled like some of the other people were. That he was a maverick of some sort that came out of it, because he certainly did a different thing than anyone else was doing at that time. And then odd people like Schumann would love him, but everybody else would think, what is this that he's doing anyway? So that's what I thought. But I wasn't really looking to make waves as a composer, but rather to help create this instrumentation, electronic instrumentation, that would show things you could do, because I was positive, and to this part I was completely right, that what would happen with this new technology is that people would want to get involved so that they can make money, and they would make what they knew about music, which was traditional instruments, and they'd make it electronically. So the first thing we'd have is a keyboard, and eventually we got, and that was only because that was easy. If you wanted a trumpet, that did come later, and saxophones and clarinets and other instruments, and finally string instruments, but they were difficult to technologically make. So the keyboard would be the first. And that certainly, the Buchla came, Silver Apples of the Moon came 1 year before Switched on Bach, luckily, because nobody would listen to it. It was, and it is a really testament to how correct I was about what was going on. And that was really my thought, a new music. It plagued me all my life. I still live with it. I listen to the Art of the Fugue, and I wonder in the new music, what would be the equivalent to the Art of the Fugue? I'm trying.
I'm just imagining you, Morton, bicycling those 7 miles, listening to the Art of the Fugue, remembering your feelings about Berlioz, and also wondering now. You've spoken about the need to see beyond electronic music. And I feel like that might be a life's quest. I wonder what you mean by that. And you've said that technology should allow you to move back to your inner self.
Yeah, through to that technology, not beyond technology. Through technology. I may have said beyond technology, but you need technology to do that. Well, I did it, actually. I began doing it starting with touch, but that was 1969. By 1970, I developed, about 1969, I called Don Buchla on the phone, and I said, I've made a big mistake, because I was thinking so much about painting that I was constantly telling him about using your hands. So we use our fingers and different ways of pressing things and pushing things. And I said, I left out the thing that I'm actually best at, using not my voice, but my breath. And I would like to use my voice and transfer that into the brush, the brush. So he made me an envelope detector, which translated the amplitude of my voice into, instead of in addition to the touch things. And I got really good at that, and I still use that as a model. So I could, and I could take the very envelope of the amplitude and send it back into the electronics and make it go. Well, I can't sing the electronics, but into it, and I really perfected that by the late 70s. I finally got until spring, and then A Sky of Cloudless Sulfur with the last one. That's how I ended with the records, and moved on to other places and translating. I kept translating that in other ways. It's still I work that way now. I have a wonderful breath controller that I use that allows me to play the clarinet practically into it, but do it, but not as a performance instrument, but as an entrance. Like instead of the brush, I have my mouth, my voice that I can breaststroke, sound, and then you translate into electronic sounds that move through the room, and anyway, you get the idea. So that's what I meant, and you actually can do it. I think we'll get better. I think that will get better, but you don't get better at it unless someone needs it. Someone has to break that thing, and I'm writing a memoir, and I'm going to share. I'm trying to share like mad. I still teach lectures twice a week. I'm trying to make this known, and I'm releasing all the technology that I've done. There'll be, along with my memoir, there'll be a website that you can come in and download for free.
That's wonderful.
How to do all
That's
these
wonderful.
things. These things.
That is so wonderful to hear, Morton. Really, how great both the memoir and what you're going to share with the world in terms of technology. I want to bring you back again, if you permit me, to being even younger. As a very young child, you were transformed by reading a biography of Mozart, as well as several books by Stoic philosophers. What was it, Morton, about these books that opened your mind? When I read about this, it reminded me of the wonderful line of Frank Zappa, who said, "A mind is like a parachute; it doesn't work if it isn't open." And what is it that opened you at that moment with Mozart and with the Stoic philosophers?
I honestly don't know. I know exactly. I was about a little under 9 years old.
Amazing.
And I don't really know. I actually went through several years of psychoanalysis, and I never really. I couldn't tell you for sure. I don't really know.
This is your chance.
Yeah. But and the pair, of course. Well, I loved. I played the clarinet. I played by 9 years old. I was already playing the Mozart clarinet concerto. So Mozart and Brahms for me were the two composers that had music, for the clarinet that I really loved more than anything. And reading the Mozart, I don't even know how I got the biography, but in reading the biography of Mozart, I can tell you it's kind of odd, but if my memory tells me what I was really what really opened my mind, what I remember most is that he was poor. He was and only lived to 30 some odd years. I thought he lived to 30. I think he lived a little bit longer than that. But
36.
But somehow the 30 rang in my head, and that's what until later in life I thought he had died at 30. I even thought I was going to die at 30. But I won't bother with that story. You can get it out of my memoir. But those are the things that, the fact that he was a great musician and the music was so beautiful, that didn't open my mind. What opened my mind was that he was poor and died young, and and that triggered the notion A, that maybe I could be a composer, and B, I better live my life as hard and fast as I can because I may die young. and I did. And the Stoic philosophy for me was a kind of existential. There was no there was, but I didn't know about it. There was a kind of existential quality to it that meant you live your life. Like what I got from there was, I don't know exactly where or how. I read Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, and I don't know where it is that I got it, whether it's in the books or it's just part of my memory bank that it just transformed. But what I learned was, for me, at that point, the meaning of life for me, and that it never changed, which is you find out who you are. Your duty is to find out who you are, what you are, and do the very best you can with that, and share what you do with other people. That's what I've done my whole life.
Not a bad lesson to learn.
Not a bad lesson to learn,
and not a bad lesson to learn when you find books in your parents' garage and read them and read them for a year when you're 9 years old. You met Stan Brakhage when you were both quite young. To what extent do you see parallels between what he did in the realm of film and what you've done in the realm of music? And is he still with you? We were very close in the early years, in the early 50s. And we've spent lots of time together, and his notion was, who knows, maybe I was influenced by it, I don't know, but there was no technology for music at that time. But his notion was to make art he was very well read, extremely well read, and but he chose film because he felt that was not only a new medium for the future, but that it was the film stock itself won't live; it will die. And we used to have these talks where we would talk. Maybe we should just close libraries so people would just live now and make things now. Of course, we spent a lot of time in reference libraries in Denver looking up books and things like that. So it was kind of immature, but that notion of wanting to do a new thing, and when we were starting the Tape Center in the early '60s in San Francisco, Stan came and lived in San Francisco for I don't know how long, maybe a year, and he actually made a film of us, which we can't find, nobody can find now, but it was very similar to he was trying to create a new. He didn't like, as well, many of the experimental people at that time. There weren't that many, but those people that I knew, and certainly Stan,
didn't think it was, they were making new old things, they were making new old art by having people talk on film, because you have that already going in the theater. It should be an art form of its own. That was the real feeling at that point in time. It never really materialized to a large extent, but that's what he was trying to do. And I think it is very similar, because what I've done, what you hear on records is pretty much new, and not sometimes new old music, and sometimes it's just a little changed old music. And the on records, and that's happening with the technology. I think it's extremely difficult to make a new thing, and I think you can influence people. But an abstract painting lasted, but for a while it had the same impact, and it stays. But still, the majority of people don't do. They don't go in that direction. But it does have an impact. It does make a change, and I think in that respect, we were similar in that way.
Morton, what a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, it's really wonderful. And, reading about also that moment in 1959 when the credit card first came about, and those pivotal moments when things actually changed. And I'm thinking, probably I imagine that Marshall McLuhan would have at some point in your life had an impact on you. And thinking about that, I was thinking, what better way to end than to ask you to comment on this Marshall McLuhan quotation, where he says that every society honors its live conformists and its dead troublemakers.
Yeah, well, we actually read, a group of us read some notes from the lecture he gave that led into understanding media. So we actually knew McLuhan's writing almost 2 years before the book came out, 3 years maybe even. And it was a big influence on me. The quote I like is, "We walk into the future backwards, looking through a rear-view mirror."
Yeah, it's fantastic. No, it's really. How do you understand that, Morton?
Well, I understand it differently. I've understood it differently throughout my life, but now I understand it because I've been listening to audiobooks on how the brain works with memory. And I think that I see it now. I don't know exactly I don't know exactly how he intended it, but I see it now as a real truism. We have no choice. I used to think we had a choice, but I don't think we have a choice. We have to reconstruct the past. We have no future. The future is always now, and we only have the past and the present. We don't have the future. We're constantly moving into it. And so the secret for me, and I think that's what it's come to mean, is that you have to reorganize the past and allow it to break through in new ways, to make a little crack ahead. You can just see a footprint to go forward. So to try to look forward, I can tell you that if I drop something, I know it's going to hit the ground. That's about it. Other than that, you're just guessing. So the idea of constantly opening this up and pushing that road ahead, and gradually being able to turn your head from the rearview mirror and walk into that dark future and make little tiny steps at a time. That's been my life. So that's it.
Morton, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking my call. It's really been a great pleasure to speak with you. I hope that someday when travel again is possible, we meet in person. But until then...
Well, that would be very nice. Can I give you one little, because this was the whatever you called these programs. The being locked up, the quarantine. I always wanted to go and be the first colonist, or among the first colonists of the moon or Mars. And in either case, I have a little picture of people with little things on my wall that has people they're out in the field, but they have these things around their head, because there's no oxygen in the air. And when this first happened, I thought, well, I can't go to Mars and I can't go to the moon, but this is the way I'd have to live in my house with the oxygen in it, and I have to talk to people through technology. And so, I mean, it's not that I like doing that, but it gave me a sense that if we did actually colonize, this is the way we'd have to live in quarantine, at least for many generations. So for me, it's sort of, for me personally, I'm not talking about, what a wonderful thing had happened, but for me personally, it's sort of I never got to go to the moon, of course, or to Mars, but it gives me a sense of what it must have felt like, but what it would have felt, what it will feel like at some point down,
when we
down
go.
the line. Yeah, when we go. Okay.
Morton, thank you so much, and all the very best. Stay safe, and let us hope we meet here or on the moon.
I would prefer Mars, actually.
Okay.
But the moon's okay.
It's a date and it's a deal.
Okay.
All the best.
Okay. All the best to you, too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.